Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck of the Serpent's Wake as Captain Dermot Rourke surveyed the horizon through his brass spyglass. The Gulf of Mexico stretched endlessly before them, its waters a deep emerald green that reflected the cloudless sky above. Salt spray misted over the worn wooden railings, and the familiar creak of the ship's hull provided a rhythmic soundtrack to another day of hunting. Rourke lowered his spyglass and turned to face his crew. 37 men stood before him, their weathered faces bearing the scars of countless battles, and their eyes holding the cold glint of those who had long ago abandoned any pretense of mercy. These were not ordinary sailors. They were pirates in all but name, operating under letters of marque that gave their brutality a thin veneer of legitimacy. Bosun Martinez, Rourke called to his second-in-command, a lean man whose sun-darkened skin told the story of decades spent under the merciless southern sun. "What news from the crow's nest?" Martinez stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing against the deck. "Captain, young Thompson spotted smoke on the southeastern horizon about 20 minutes ago. Could be a merchant vessel, sir." Rourke's lips curved into a predatory smile. At 42, he had been commanding ships in these waters for over 15 years, and his reputation for ruthlessness had spread from New Orleans to the Florida Keys. Merchants knew to avoid the routes he frequented, but occasionally some fool would venture into his territory with cargo too valuable to resist. "Excellent," Rourke said, his Irish accent still faintly coloring his words despite years in American waters. "All hands, prepare for pursuit. I want every sail unfurled and the cannons loaded with chain shot. We'll cripple her before she can run." The crew sprang into action with practiced efficiency. Men scrambled up the rigging, their calloused hands working the ropes with expert precision. The Serpent's Wake groaned as her sails caught the wind, and soon they were cutting through the waves at impressive speed. As they drew closer to their target, details began to emerge through the spyglass. The vessel was larger than Rourke had initially expected, a three-masted ship with an unusual design he didn't immediately recognize. Her hull was painted a pristine white that seemed to glow against the blue water, and her sails bore no merchant's markings. "Strange," muttered Thompson, the young lookout who had first spotted the ship. "Never seen anything like her in these waters." Rourke studied the vessel more carefully. Something about her struck him as odd. The ship moved with an almost ethereal grace, her sails full despite the fact that the wind had noticeably died down in the past few minutes. More peculiar still, she showed no signs of attempting to flee, even though the Serpent's Wake was clearly bearing down on her with hostile intent. "Captain," Martinez said, lowering his own spyglass, "I'm seeing something mighty peculiar. That ship, she's got crosses mounted on her masts. Big ones, made of what looks like silver." Rourke felt a brief flicker of unease but quickly dismissed it. He had not built his fearsome reputation by allowing superstition to cloud his judgment. "Crosses or no crosses, Martinez, a prize is a prize. Ready the boarding party." As they closed the distance, more details became visible. The ship's deck was populated by figures in brown robes, moving about their business with calm deliberation despite the approaching threat. Rourke could make out the glint of religious artifacts scattered across the vessel. Chalices, ornate crosses, and what appeared to be elaborately decorated books. "Saints preserve us," whispered Jameson, one of the older crew members. "That's no merchant vessel, Captain. That's a floating monastery." The words sent a ripple of nervous murmurs through the crew. Even these hardened men who had shed blood across half the Caribbean felt a chill at the implications. Attacking merchants was one thing. They were often armed and prepared for battle. But monks? Holy men carrying sacred relics? Rourke's jaw tightened. He could sense the growing unease among his men, and he knew that any sign of weakness on his part would undermine his authority. In the brutal world of piracy and privateering, fear was a luxury no captain could afford. "Listen well, you superstitious dogs," he roared, his voice carrying across the deck with commanding authority. "I don't care if that ship is carrying the Pope himself. We came here for plunder, and plunder we shall have. Those holy men are likely carrying more gold and silver than any merchant vessel we've taken this year." He strode to the rail and pointed at the approaching ship. "Look at those crosses, those chalices gleaming in the sun. That's not brass, men. That's pure silver, maybe even gold. Think of what those relics would fetch in the markets of New Orleans or Galveston. The mention of profit began to overcome the crew's religious reservations. These were men driven by greed as much as bloodlust, and the promise of exceptional treasure was a powerful motivator. "But Captain," Jameson persisted, his weathered face creased with worry, "attacking holy men, that's a line most of us ain't crossed. There are stories." "Stories," Rourke spat. "Fairy tales told by weak men to justify their cowardice. The only power those monks possess is the gold they carry, and soon that power will be ours." The Serpent's Wake drew alongside the monastery ship, close enough now that individual faces could be distinguished among the robed figures. The monks showed no signs of panic or fear. Instead, they stood calmly at their rails, some holding books, others clasping wooden crosses to their chests. Their faces held an expression of serene acceptance that only served to infuriate Rourke further. "Ahoy there," Rourke called across the water, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "I am Captain Dermot Rourke of the Serpent's Wake, operating under commission of the Republic of Texas. I demand you surrender your vessel for inspection." One of the monks, an elderly man with a long white beard, stepped forward. His voice carried clearly across the water, calm and measured despite the circumstances. "Good Captain, we are brothers of the Sacred Heart, carrying holy relics to establish a mission in the Louisiana Territory. We carry nothing of material value, only items of spiritual significance to our order." Rourke laughed harshly. "Spiritual significance that glitters like gold in the sunlight, I'd wager. Surrender now and I'll allow you to depart in your ship's boats with your lives. Resist and I'll send you all to meet your maker." The elderly monk's expression remained unchanged. "Captain, I implore you to reconsider. These relics have been blessed by His Holiness himself. To defile them would bring me a handsome profit," Rourke interrupted. "Fire a warning shot across their bow, Martinez. Let's see how quickly their faith wavers when faced with cold iron." The cannon's roar shattered the peaceful morning air, and the ball whistled just feet above the monastery ship's deck. Still, the monks did not flinch. If anything, they seemed to draw closer together, their lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. This serene defiance only stoked Rourke's rage. He had built his reputation on inspiring terror, and these holy men's calm acceptance felt like a personal affront to his authority. "Very well," he snarled. "If they wish to die as martyrs, I'll grant them their wish. All hands prepare for boarding. Show no mercy. I want that ship stripped of everything valuable." As his crew readied their weapons and prepared the boarding hooks, Rourke felt a strange chill run down his spine despite the warm Gulf air. For just a moment, he thought he heard something beneath the usual sounds of creaking wood and flapping sails, a low, melodic chanting that seemed to emanate from the monastery ship itself. He shook off the sensation and drew his cutlass, its blade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Whatever supernatural nonsense his imagination was conjuring, it would not deter him from claiming the greatest prize of his career. The boarding planks crashed down between the two vessels with a thunderous clatter that echoed across the calm waters. Captain Rourke led the charge, his cutlass raised high as he leaped onto the deck of the monastery ship. Behind him, 30 of his most ruthless crew members poured across, their weapons gleaming in the late afternoon sun. What greeted them defied every expectation Rourke had formed during his years of piracy. The monks did not flee, did not beg for mercy, did not even raise their hands in surrender. Instead, they remained exactly where they stood, their eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. The elderly monk who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his hands clasped peacefully before him. "Captain Rourke," he said, his voice carrying a strange resonance that seemed to make the very air shimmer. "I am Brother Augustine. I ask you one final time to reconsider your actions. The relics aboard this vessel are not mere treasures. They are sacred artifacts that have been consecrated for the glory of God." Rourke's face twisted with contempt as he pressed the tip of his cutlass against the old monk's throat. "The only God I serve is gold, old man. Now stand aside before I send you to meet yours." Brother Augustine's eyes filled with profound sadness, but he did not move. "Then may God have mercy on your soul, for you know not what you do." With a savage grin, Rourke shoved the monk aside and gestured to his men. "Tear this ship apart. I want every piece of silver, every golden chalice, every jeweled cross. If it shines, it's ours." The pirates spread across the deck like locusts, smashing open barrels and crates with their axes. What they found inside exceeded even Rourke's greedy expectations. Chalices wrought from pure gold, crosses encrusted with precious gems, ornate books bound in silver and adorned with pearls. There were reliquaries containing what appeared to be fragments of bone and cloth, set in housings of incredible craftsmanship. "Captain," called Martinez, his voice filled with awe as he lifted a golden monstrance that caught the sunlight and threw brilliant reflections across the deck. "This piece alone could buy a plantation in Louisiana. There's enough treasure here to make us all wealthy men." But as the looting continued, Rourke noticed something that made his skin crawl. Despite the violence and chaos surrounding them, the monks continued their prayers, their voices growing stronger and more unified. The chanting, which had been barely audible before, now rose in haunting harmonies that seemed to resonate through the very bones of the ship. "Shut them up," Rourke snarled to his men. "I can't think with that infernal noise." Several pirates moved to silence the monks, but as they approached, something extraordinary happened. The air around the holy men began to shimmer like heat waves rising from sun-baked sand. The pirates' weapons, raised to strike, seemed to slow and then stop entirely, as if moving through thick honey. "What in hell's name?" one of the pirates began, but his words were cut short as an invisible force knocked him backward, sending him sprawling across the deck. Rourke felt his blood run cold, but his greed overrode his growing unease. "Tricks and parlor games," he shouted, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "Load everything onto our ship. We'll sort through it properly once we're away from these lunatics." As his men worked frantically to transfer the treasure, Rourke's attention was drawn to a particular item that Brother Augustine clutched protectively to his chest, an ornate silver reliquary in the shape of a small church, its spires reaching toward heaven like grasping fingers. "That one," Rourke said, pointing with his cutlass. "Give it here, monk." Brother Augustine shook his head slowly. "This contains a fragment of the true cross, blessed by St. Peter himself. I cannot allow you to defile it." Rourke's patience, already strained to its limits, finally snapped. With a roar of rage, he lunged forward and struck the elderly monk across the face with the flat of his blade. Brother Augustine crumpled to the deck, blood flowing from a deep gash across his cheek, but his grip on the reliquary never loosened. "Captain," Martinez called urgently from across the deck. "We need to go. The wind's picking up, and I don't like the look of those clouds rolling in." Rourke glanced at the horizon and saw that his bosun was right. Dark storm clouds were gathering with unnatural speed, and the previously calm waters were beginning to chop and foam. But more troubling still was the way the monks' chanting had intensified, their voices now rising in what sounded almost like a funeral dirge. With a vicious kick, Rourke sent Brother Augustine rolling across the deck and snatched the silver reliquary from his weakened grasp. The moment his fingers closed around it, he felt a shock of cold so intense it seemed to freeze his very bones. For an instant, he thought he heard a voice, not audible, but somehow speaking directly into his mind, warning him to release the sacred object. He dismissed the sensation as nerves and tucked the reliquary into his coat. "All right, you dogs. We've got what we came for. Back to the Serpent's Wake." As his men began retreating across the boarding planks, laden with their stolen treasure, Rourke made a decision that would haunt him for the brief remainder of his life. The monks' continuing prayers grated on his nerves like fingernails on slate, and their supernatural defiance had humiliated him before his crew. "Martinez," he called as they reached their own deck, "bring up the firebombs. We're going to send this floating cathedral to the bottom." "Captain," Martinez said hesitantly, "are you sure that's wise? Burning a holy ship. Some of the men are already spooked by what happened over there." Rourke rounded on him with blazing eyes. "Are you questioning my orders, bosun? That ship and everyone on it are witnesses to what we've done here today. Dead men tell no tales, and sunken ships carry no evidence." Within minutes, several of Rourke's men had prepared crude incendiary devices, bottles filled with whale oil and pitch, with cloth wicks protruding from their necks. The captain himself lit the first one, its flame dancing wickedly in the gathering gloom. "This is for defying Captain Dermot Rourke," he shouted across the water as he hurled the bomb onto the monastery ship's deck. The bottle shattered against the mainmast, and flames immediately began spreading across the dry wood. More firebombs followed, and soon the entire vessel was engulfed in an inferno that painted the darkening sky orange and red. But as the flames consumed the ship, something impossible happened. Instead of screams of terror and pain, the voices of the monks rose even louder, their chanting now taking on an otherworldly quality that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Through the smoke and fire, Rourke could see their silhouettes still standing calmly on the burning deck, their arms raised toward heaven. The wind, which had been steadily increasing, suddenly shifted direction and began blowing the smoke from the burning ship directly toward the Serpent's wake. As the acrid clouds enveloped Rourke's vessel, the captain noticed something that made his blood run cold. The smoke didn't smell like burning wood and canvas. Instead, it carried the scent of incense and something else, something that reminded him of the sea itself, but deeper and more ancient than any ocean he had ever sailed. "Cast off," he roared to his crew. "Get us away from this cursed ship before—" His words were cut short as the most extraordinary thing yet occurred. Even as the monastery ship burned, even as her masts collapsed and her hull began to list, the monks' voices continued unabated. And now impossibly other voices seemed to join them from beneath the waves themselves. As the Serpent's wake pulled away from the burning wreck, Rourke felt the first crystalline grain of salt form on the back of his hand. 3 days had passed since the burning of the monastery ship, and the Serpent's wake now sailed through waters that seemed to grow more hostile with each passing hour. What had begun as a single grain of salt on Captain Rourke's hand had spread with alarming speed, forming crystalline patches that covered his knuckles and were beginning to climb toward his wrist. Rourke stood in his cabin, staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror mounted above his wash basin. The salt formations weren't painful, not exactly, but they felt wrong in a way that made his skin crawl. When he touched them, they felt cold and somehow alive, as if tiny creatures were burrowing beneath his flesh. "Captain?" Martinez's voice called from outside the cabin door. "We need to talk, sir. It's about the crew." Rourke pulled on his leather gloves to hide the spreading salt crystals and opened the door. His bosun's weathered face was creased with worry lines that seemed to have deepened considerably over the past few days. "What is it, Martinez? Are the men still complaining about that business with the monks?" Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "It's more than complaining now, sir. Half the crew is talking about jumping ship at the next port. They're saying we're cursed, and honestly, Captain, I'm starting to think they might be right." Rourke's jaw tightened. Superstitious nonsense. What's gotten into them? Well, for starters, there's young Thompson, the lookout who first spotted that monastery ship. He's been having nightmares every night since we burned her. Wakes up screaming about monks rising from the water trying to drag him down. Nightmares are hardly— Then there's the water, Captain. Martinez interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Our drinking water. It's been turning salty, barrel by barrel. We started with 6 casks of fresh water when we left Galveston, and now only 2 remain drinkable. The rest taste like they've been mixed with seawater." Rourke felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced his expression to remain stern. "Probably contamination from storm damage. Have the men check the barrel seals." "We did, sir. 3 times. The barrels are sound, but the water keeps changing anyway." Martinez leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "And there's something else. That treasure we took from the monks. Some of it's been changing too." "What do you mean, changing?" "Come see for yourself, Captain." Martinez led him to the ship's hold, where the stolen religious artifacts had been stored in wooden chests. As they descended into the dim space below deck, Rourke immediately noticed something wrong. The air felt thick and oppressive, almost suffocating, and there was a sound. A low, rhythmic murmuring that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do you hear that, Captain?" Martinez whispered. "It's been going on for 2 days now. Sounds almost like chanting," Rourke finished, though he tried to keep the unease out of his voice. They approached the largest chest, which contained the golden chalices and jeweled crosses. Martinez lifted the lid and both men stepped back in shock. The beautiful golden artifacts were still there, but they were now covered in the same crystalline salt formations that plagued Rourke's hand. Worse still, the salt seemed to be moving, growing before their very eyes like some kind of living coral. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God," Martinez breathed, crossing himself. "Captain, we need to get rid of this stuff. Throw it overboard before whatever's happening to it happens to us." Rourke's mind raced. The treasure represented a fortune beyond his wildest dreams, enough wealth to retire in luxury for the rest of his life. But as he stared at the salt-encrusted artifacts, he felt something stirring in his chest, a cold sensation that seemed to spread outward from his heart, like ice water in his veins. "No," he said finally. "We keep the treasure. A little salt doesn't make it any less valuable. Captain, with all due respect, this isn't natural. The men are scared, and frankly, so am I. Whatever those monks did before they died, it's affecting the ship, the cargo, maybe all of us. As if summoned by Martinez's words, footsteps thundered down the ladder behind them. Jameson, the old sailor who had first identified the monastery ship, appeared in the hold's entrance, his face pale with terror. "Captain," he gasped, "you need to come topside right now. There's something in the water following us." The three men rushed back to the deck, where they found the entire crew gathered at the stern rail, staring out at the churning wake behind their ship. At first Rourke saw nothing unusual, just the normal white foam and bubbles left by their passage through the water. Then he saw it. Beneath the surface, barely visible through the blue-green depths, something large was keeping pace with the serpent's wake. It wasn't quite a ship. The shape was wrong for that. But it was clearly artificial, constructed rather than natural. As Rourke watched, transfixed, the object seemed to rise slightly closer to the surface, and he caught a glimpse of what looked like a mast bearing a silver cross. "It's been there since dawn," Thompson said, his young voice cracking with fear. "Started as just a shadow, but it's getting clearer. And, Captain, I swear I can hear them singing." Rourke strained his ears and, to his horror, realized the boy was right. Faintly, carried on the wind, came the sound of voices raised in harmony, the same haunting chant they had heard as the monastery ship burned. "All hands!" Rourke shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. "Set full sail. I want every scrap of canvas we have catching wind. Whatever's following us will outrun it." The crew sprang into action, but their movements were sluggish, dispirited. As they worked the rigging, several men kept glancing fearfully over their shoulders at the thing in their wake. But speed brought no relief. No matter how fast the serpent's wake sailed, no matter how the wind filled her sails, the ghostly presence beneath the waves maintained its steady pursuit. Worse still, as the hours passed, more details became visible. Rourke could now make out what appeared to be figures moving about on the submerged vessel's deck, robed forms that gestured toward the fleeing pirate ship with what looked like accusation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded Rourke uncomfortably of the burning monastery ship, he noticed that the salt formations on his hands had spread further. They now covered his forearms beneath his shirt sleeves, and he could feel new crystals forming on his chest and shoulders. More disturbing still was the effect the curse seemed to be having on his mind. Memories of the attack on the monks played over and over in his thoughts, but now he seemed to be seeing events from their perspective. He could feel Brother Augustine's pain as the cutlass struck his face, could sense the old monk's profound sadness at the desecration of the sacred relics. "Captain," Martinez appeared at his elbow, jarring him from his dark reverie. "The men want to know what our heading is. Should we make for Galveston? New Orleans? Some of them are suggesting we sail for open ocean, try to lose whatever's following us." Rourke looked out at the spectral ship that continued to pace them through the darkening waters. In the fading light he could see more details, the faces of the monks, their eyes glowing with an inner light that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. "No port will welcome us with that thing in our wake," he said finally, "and I doubt the open ocean will provide any sanctuary. Whatever judgment we're facing, it will find us wherever we run." "Then what do we do, Captain?" Rourke touched the silver reliquary that still rested in his coat pocket, the fragment of the true cross that he had torn from Brother Augustine's dying grasp. Even through the leather of his gloves, he could feel it pulsing with an energy that seemed to resonate with the growing salt formations on his skin. "We do what pirates have always done, Martinez," he said grimly. "We sail until we can't sail anymore, and we face whatever comes with steel in our hands and defiance in our hearts." But even as he spoke the brave words, Rourke knew with growing certainty that this was a battle no amount of courage or weaponry could win. The curse that flowed through his veins with each heartbeat was not something that could be fought with conventional means. It was justice itself, as inexorable as the tide, and it would not be denied. The seventh dawn since the burning brought with it a sight that would haunt the surviving crew members for the rest of their lives. Captain Dermot Rourke stood at the bow of the Serpent's wake, but he was no longer entirely human. Salt crystals covered half his body now, transforming his left arm into a gnarled sculpture of white and gray mineral deposits. His face, once weathered and cruel, had become a grotesque mask where flesh and salt competed for dominance. The ghostly monastery ship no longer followed at a distance. Throughout the night, it had risen from the depths until it sailed alongside them on the surface, its spectral crew clearly visible in the pale morning light. Brother Augustine stood at its bow, his wounds from Rourke's blade still visible but somehow transformed into marks of divine suffering rather than mere injury. "Captain," Martinez's voice cracked as he approached. The bosun had aged a decade in the past week, his hair now streaked with premature gray. "The men, they're ready to mutiny. Half of them want to throw you overboard, thinking it might lift the curse. The other half want to abandon ship entirely." Rourke turned slowly, the movement causing salt crystals to crack and shift along his transformed limbs. When he spoke, his voice carried a hollow, echoing quality, as if it came from the bottom of a deep well. "Let them try, Martinez. I've been claimed by something far more powerful than any mutiny." As if summoned by his words, the wind suddenly died completely, leaving both ships becalmed on water that had turned mirror smooth. The silence was broken only by the gentle creaking of timber and rope, and the increasingly audible chanting that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. Thompson, the young lookout, pointed with a trembling finger toward the water between the two vessels. "Captain, look at the sea." The water was changing, becoming clearer and clearer until it seemed like looking through perfectly transparent glass. Beneath the surface, impossible sights revealed themselves. The burned remains of the monastery ship lay on the ocean floor, but it was not empty. The monks moved about its sunken decks, tending to their duties as if death and the crushing depths were mere inconveniences. And they were not alone. The seabed around the wreck was populated by countless other figures, sailors and passengers from ships that had met violent ends, victims of pirates and storms and the cruel indifference of the sea. They stood in silent witness, their pale faces turned upward toward the serpent's wake. "They're all watching us," whispered Jameson. "All the souls we've sent to the depths over the years. They're waiting for justice." Rourke felt the silver reliquary burning like ice against his chest. With movements that sent crystalline fragments scattering across the deck, he reached into his coat and withdrew the sacred object. It pulsed with its own internal light now, and the moment it touched the open air, the chanting from the ghostly ship intensified. Brother Augustine's voice carried clearly across the still water, no longer the plea of a dying man, but the pronouncement of divine judgment. "Captain Rourke," the spectral monk called, "you have defiled that which was consecrated to the Almighty. You have shed innocent blood and burned that which was sacred. The sea itself cries out for justice, and justice shall be served." Rourke tried to respond with his usual defiance, but the words that emerged from his salt-crusted throat were not his own. I see them now. All of them. Every soul I've sent to the depths. They're calling to me." The transformation was accelerating. Salt crystals spread across his remaining flesh like living things, each new formation accompanied by memories that were not his own. He experienced the terror of drowning sailors, the despair of murdered passengers, the anguish of families left destitute by his raids. The weight of every life he had taken pressed down upon him like the crushing depths of the ocean itself. Martinez grabbed his arm, or tried to. His hand passed through what appeared to be solid salt formations as if they were made of seafoam. "Captain, fight it. Whatever's happening to you, you can still—" "No," Rourke interrupted, his voice now carrying the sound of waves breaking on distant shores. "This is what I deserve, Martinez. This is what we all deserve." He turned to face his crew, and they collectively stepped back in horror. His eyes had become pools of brine that reflected depths no living man should possess. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of the ocean itself. "Listen well, you who follow in my wake. The sea remembers every drop of blood spilled upon her surface. She remembers every innocent soul committed to her depths, and she demands payment for the debts we have incurred." Several crew members fell to their knees, overcome by the supernatural weight of his presence. Others tried to flee but found themselves unable to move, held fast by an invisible current that seemed to flow across the deck. Rourke raised the silver reliquary high above his head, and as he did so, the ghostly monastery ship began to emit a brilliant light that outshone the morning sun. The chanting reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. "I, Dermot Rourke, who have lived by violence and ruled by fear, accept the judgment of the deep. Let my transformation serve as warning to any who would follow in my path." The reliquary blazed with divine fire, and the final transformation began. Salt crystals erupted across Rourke's remaining flesh, but now they were beautiful, perfect formations that caught and reflected the holy light streaming from the monastery ship. He was becoming something new, something that belonged neither to the world of the living nor the realm of the dead. The tide that raised me up shall claim me, he intoned, his voice now indistinguishable from the sound of eternal waves. But my crew shall live to tell this tale. They shall carry word to every port from Galveston to Key West. They shall speak of Captain Rourke, who defied the divine and was claimed by the justice of the deep. With those words, the transformation completed itself. Where the ruthless pirate captain had stood, there now remained only a perfect sculpture of white salt in the shape of a man, his face frozen in an expression of terrible understanding. The ghostly monastery ship began to fade as the first natural wind in days filled the Serpent's Wake sails. Brother Augustine's voice carried across the water one final time, no longer accusatory but somehow filled with infinite compassion. Go in peace, and sin no more. Let this tale be told, that others might learn wisdom from folly and mercy from judgment. As the phantom vessel disappeared beneath the waves, the salt statue that had been Captain Rourke began to crumble. Grain by grain, crystal by crystal, it dissolved in the morning breeze, scattering across the ocean that had claimed him. Within moments, nothing remained but an empty patch of deck and the silver reliquary, which lay gleaming in the sunlight, somehow cleansed of its burden. Martinez, now the Serpent's Wake's captain by default, looked around at his traumatized crew. They were broken men, forever changed by what they had witnessed, but they were alive, and with life came the opportunity for redemption. Secure that reliquary, he ordered quietly. We'll return it to the church in New Orleans. And then, he paused, looking out at the endless expanse of blue water that had reclaimed their captain. Then we find honest work. The sea has shown us mercy today, but I don't think she'll be so forgiving a second time. As the Serpent's Wake sailed toward the distant shore, the surviving crew members carried with them a story that would spread through every waterfront tavern and dock in the Gulf of Mexico. They spoke of Captain Rourke, the ruthless pirate who defied heaven itself and was transformed grain by grain into the very salt of the sea. And sailors, being superstitious folk, remembered the tale well. For generations to come, whenever a captain was tempted to commit some act of particular cruelty or sacrilege, someone would remember the story of the man who was claimed by the tide, and perhaps, just perhaps, choose mercy over violence, understanding over greed. The ocean keeps its own accounts, and the debt of blood is always paid.